Hello, my name is Nelson Schuman with Restored to Freedom, and today I'm going to be doing an amazing interview with a woman from Michigan who's going to be talking about a daughter who she had adopted and had some behavior that was really a challenge to work with, and then how she learned about taking authority and commanding spirits to be gone from her, and how she changed dramatically. And it's very powerful, especially for anyone that has ever adopted children where you really don't know their background, from their father and mother's lineage and ancestry, and how spirits, could be affecting them. So it's going to be a very powerful testimony for those that have adopted children, or those, that simply do have children of their own, where we'll be learning about how, by taking our authority of Jesus Christ, how we can change behaviors that are negative from children to positive. So, hello, Leah. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I am awesome.
Good.
So I've set things up for the viewers and told them that you had. In fact, I didn't tell them though how many children that you have adopted total. But if you can give us a little bit of your background, I've said that you're from Michigan, but what prompted you to adopt, and how many children have you adopted, and what are some of the challenges with what has transpired, prior to going through, the process of helping one of your children to get set free?
Well, me and my husband were married in 2001. I immediately got pregnant with my oldest biological son. My pregnancy was kind of rough, so adoption came on my radar pretty quickly. And my husband, I didn't want it to just be me going after it without him wanting to. And I finally, after chit-chatting his ear off about it for months, prayed and asked God to have him bring it up if we were really supposed to dive into adoption. And one day we were talking about, we were actually working out our insurance stuff, kind of planning on me getting pregnant again. And then out of nowhere, he looks at me and goes, "We should just adopt." And I immediately was like, well, I guess that's my answer. So I looked at all the different avenues of adoption, and I kept just coming back to where the biggest need was. And the need seemed to be in foster care, because private adoption and stuff like that had huge waiting lists, and I wanted to find a need, not just be fulfilling our desires, So we dove into foster care in 2009. We got licensed in 2009, and the child that I'm going to be talking about today, she was my third foster placement. I had 2 kids before her, and then I got a phone call telling me they had a little girl who was pre-adoptive, which according to them means she'll probably come up for adoption. Her name is Ely, and she came into our home at about 18 months old. And Ely, from the get-go, there was always something about her that kind of concerned me. She was like, even just holding on to her, I felt like I was always holding on to her hand, like, a normal mom and daughter. She would be like trying to hold on to a Tasmanian devil. I have never met a kid
Wow.
that was so all over the place, and destructive and violent towards herself. Just a few years ago, we moved, so sometimes I go through some boxes that haven't been unpacked, and I found a notebook. I had been keeping a log of all the stuff that she was doing that was odd, because I knew I was going to have to get her some help. And this was back before we had adopted her. She was still a foster child at this point. And there's all these pages of me writing about, me telling her she can't do something, and her self-injuring herself, like hitting herself, finding a toy and throwing it at me, or throwing it or hitting herself with it. She would pull her own hair a lot. She was very, it's odd because she was so miserable, but she was also the happiest kid you had ever met. She was like, would laugh and play, and her countenance is kind and nice, but she just seemed miserable also. I mean,
Yeah.
just from the time she was 18 months old. So then we there came a time where the her social worker got it in her head that we should move her to a different foster home so she could be closer to her biological mother, so she could be reunited with her biological mother. That was a really weird place to be in because I wanted to support them. I had gotten to know them. I did spend a lot of time with her biological parents. And I was very torn because, of course, I wanted to take care of this child and make sure she was safe and loved. But I also could see the bond she had with her biological father. So I was in this weird place where I didn't think that was what was best for her. I told them moving her to another foster home would be a big mistake. And in the end, I mean, they were going to court. They told me she was going to be moved no matter what my opinion was, she was being moved, and I had to make my peace with it. And then they have court the next day, and nothing happens. She stays at my house. Within a few months, everything changes, and all of a sudden we're on the road to adoption. And I got to know her, like I said, I got to know her biological family quite well. And she is the only child who has ever made it out of her biological family. She has tons of biological family that has been in foster care. Her own mother aged out of foster care, actually ran away from foster care and went into adulthood that way. Her mother before her, there was a lot of issues where all these kids would go through foster care. None of them would ever be adopted. If they were adopted by a family member. They were never adopted by someone outside of this family. So by the time we got to her adoption and we're signing the paperwork, I knew God had rescued Ely out of this family. I had no idea what he was going to do or how he was going to set this little girl free from this stuff she was carrying around, but I knew he had rescued her and put her in our family. So, we also, I don't know if this is pertinent or not, but it might be later on, so I'm going to add this. We adopted her, we finished her adoption in 2012. In 2012, I had one biological son who was 10 years old, and Ely was living with us and had been for about 2 years at that point. I gave birth to my second biological child in 2012, and we also moved in a sibling group of 3 that we had been interested in adopting for 2 years. They were suddenly freed for adoption right after I had my baby, birthed my biological child. So at this point, we had gone from like 2 kids at home to having 6, which is already crazy. And then 2 months later, the biological mom of the sibling group of 3 had another baby, a little girl. And so 2 months later, she came to live with us. So by the time 2012 ended, we had gone from 2 kids at home, or 2 kids that were ours, to 7 children that were ours. So it's been a crazy ride, and this whole time Ely is being Ely. I mean, it's been a struggle. We were very concerned about letting her be around the baby at all. We were very concerned to hurt the baby. There were times that she had a very hard time with the girls with the sibling group of 3 that moved into our house. She absolutely loved playing with them and absolutely fought and was miserable with them 24/7. Like, it was very, very hard to deal with. And the sibling group of 3 that moved into our house, they came with their own baggage too. In retrospect, I know that almost every single one of my kids moved into our house with the spirit of rejection, and it was manifesting itself in this kind of Jezebel spirit behavior, the whole lying, manipulating, hiding everything, all those different things. All of my adopted children were manifesting those things, but Ely was one who was controlled to the point of violence, and just, you could tell in her mind she was just tortured, absolutely tortured. And so then the sibling group of 3 there that had turned into 4 now. 2 years later, their mom birthed a little boy. Their biological mom birthed another child. And me and my husband didn't know if we were going to take him. And God, in the car, God told me to name him Joseph. And I don't even like the name Joseph, to be honest with you. And so I kind of laughed, going, why would I name Joseph? I've never even liked that name. And my friend told me, I told her that, and she laughed, and she goes, Leah, look up what Joseph means. I'm like, okay. And so I look on Google, and what it said was, it says Joseph, and then it says, God will add, and then parentheses, it says, a son. And that was the moment that I knew that that was going to be my son. So we did,
wow. Cool.
Yeah, so we did end up adopting Joseph too. And then we moved into a bigger house. We moved about an hour away from where we were living. And this whole time, I mean, it had honestly been chaos in our house. We had done our best to do whatever the kids needed, show them love, you know, discipline them in a godly way so that their behavior would get better. And you know, you go through little times where it kind of gets better, but honestly, during the times where things would get better, we would just find out that our kids were hiding things better from us. The manipulation and the lying was, honestly, it was just out of control. The stuff they were hiding in our house, the stuff they were doing to each other, was just ridiculous. And for me, I didn't know what to do, because you go through a lot of training in foster care, but you don't go through a lot of spiritual warfare training. You know what I mean? And that really need to be trained in order to even enter the arena of adoption or foster care, because you have no idea what you just brought into your own house. You're bringing in kids who have been so wounded, even if they weren't physically or sexually abused. You are still dealing with the wounds from their mother and father, just from any rejection they feel and different things like that. So we had no clue about any of that. Me and my husband grew up in the Baptist church, and they talk about spiritual warfare and they preach right out of the Bible, but for some reason I never put together how real this was and how evil spirits will come to you. It's just the wording they use. They never are very specific. Like, I know that evil spirits, if you have doors open, will come to you and introduce thoughts to you. And we all know, everybody who grew up in church typically will know that, like, you're supposed to take every thought captive. You know, the Bible tells that. But they don't tell you that some of these thoughts that you're thinking, that voice in your head that sounds just like you, isn't you. And that's what
they don't the church does a poor job of explaining practicality of how this actually plays out every day in our thoughts. And that's what the Lord's been having me focus on, of course, with Restorative Freedom, is to think about the thoughts that you're having. And then when you have these negative thoughts, okay, if it's a bad thought, it's coming from the enemy. And that's what spiritual warfare is. You can keep it as simple as that. But the church just says that, you know, in a very general way. And so, and then you can't apply it. And then how do you take your thoughts captive? How do you shut it down? How do you kick out the spirits? So how did you hear about Restorative Freedom and my ministry?
When we moved, we started going to a new church, and they showed this video by Robert Morris that was talking about the Jezebel spirit and how it can affect pastors, people within your ministry who have the Jezebel spirit that kind of come against you. And me and my husband went on a Wednesday night. It was the first time that we really sat down and heard this pastor preach. And we walked out of that. It was a Wednesday night. We walked out of there. We went out to the car, and I'm kind of waiting for my husband to say something, because I'm sitting there like this, like, this is what we're dealing with. And I never heard of it before. Never anything. And so we were sitting in the car, and I'm waiting for him to say something, and he's not really saying anything. And so I kind of said something, and he goes, I know, that is exactly what we are dealing with. And praise God having a husband who will acknowledge this,
Yeah.
because I mean, you know,
Yeah.
deal with so many couples that usually you've got one who gets it and one that doesn't, and that
Yeah.
type of stuff.
Yeah.
And it has been life changing in our family and in our marriage, just us both understanding the spiritual
Yes.
warfare that's going on around us. I mean, even to the point of, you know how Satan works, he tries to pit everybody against each other. And even the way
Yeah.
he was trying to pit me and my husband against each other was, it
Yeah.
was just all brought to light so quickly. And all of a sudden, everything that hadn't made any sense finally made sense. And it all was just like, it was like the truth just slapped us in the face, and we're like, okay, now that we know
Yep.
what's going on, how do we deal with this? You know?
Yeah.
So we were dealing with it in a couple different areas in our life. It wasn't just the kids. I mean, we also had other issues go on. And but there was one day, and this was before this church. Oh, you asked me how I heard about your ministry. I want to finish.
Uh-huh.
I saw that video at church, and eventually I felt like God told me to post it on Facebook. So I posted that video on Facebook. And Elizabeth, who you interviewed not that long ago, she was freed from bipolar and all that stuff. She saw
Yep.
the video and immediately recognized this is what she was dealing with. So then she somehow stumbled upon your group, and that just shed the light on everything for both of us. Like, I saw that video at church, and that started us on the path to understanding this, but it wasn't until I was in your group and you explained so clearly how the mother and father hurts are open up these doors for us and for our kids, and the spirit of rejection. There's so many things within just that support group you have that answered so many questions and got it so that we could really dive into this and start working on it with the kids.
Yeah, and I'll share this with the group for people that are watching this. We're talking about the Jezebel, Ahab, Leviathan support group that's on Facebook. We have now over almost 2,400 people on it. We started it back in like September, and it's growing rapidly, and it's helping people around the world to understand what they're dealing with and how prevalent that this is. It's in at least 75 to 80% of marriages, and that's what's causing the strife and the arguing and the fighting and control, manipulation, and pride. And it goes from generation to generation to generation until we finally recognize it and then take authority and command the spirits to go. And so keep going.
So before we started going to this new church, there was one day where Ely had just lost it. I mean, she's the type of kid, she was the type of kid where if I told her to like go brush your teeth, some days that's fine, and other days that would lead to some type of crazy rage, like just
Yeah.
losing it. So at some point, I just remember standing on the steps of our front porch, and she's out in the yard acting nuts, screaming at me, screaming, I hate you, telling me she's gonna run away, telling me, and when she gets really frustrated, she'll put her hands into her hair and like act like she's gonna pull out her own hair. I've seen her, she thankfully for right now she bites her nails, so she didn't have any nails. I've seen her rake her nails down her face like she was gonna just scratch the skin off her face. And that day was honestly the day that I thought I was going to have to take her to like the ER or something and have her admitted and have somebody do something. I did get her to calm down, but some of this, I would spend a lot of time talking with her when this stuff would happen. And she, prior to this, had told me that I hear voices in my head and they tell me to do bad things. They tell me to hurt my siblings. They tell me to step on the dog. When the instance I was talking about, she told me that they had told her to go out into the woods and kill a bird or something. I'm like, how are you going to kill a bird? And she described to me, and one thing I've noticed with my children, and it's not just her, it's some of my other children too, is I know it's not Satan, but evil spirits. They literally equip these kids with the information they need to do this stuff. They will tell them enough, they will give them ideas and plans on how to execute this stuff, how open they are to this. I mean, Ely is a more obvious example, but I have another child who has methodically manipulated me and my husband against other children in our home and has been able to hide it unlike I've ever seen anybody be able to hide something they were doing. And it was so specific. So, I mean, for years, they have been shaping her mind to manipulate the way she does. And she's just very good at it. But she didn't come up with this stuff herself. You can't tell me that a child who's 4, 5, 6 years old is able to craft these ideas themselves. That just doesn't even make any sense.
Right.
So anyway,
Right.
so that was kind of like this breaking point in my head where I'm like, this kid Ely is going to end up on medication or in a psych ward, or I know it's going to happen because, I mean, it's just getting worse and worse. And so, anyway, my friend Elizabeth saw that video I posted, and she told me, she's like, I'm going to add you to this group. I don't know if it'll be for you or not, but, you know, just take a look at it. And it's because that's kind of like how we all are, because we're not used to talking to people about this, and you don't want to think you're crazy. So she added me, and immediately it all just started ringing true to me. I mean, just so accurate. And one of the first things I did was listen to your video that you can look up on YouTube, the Worldwide Deliverance video that goes through and kind of describes Jezebel, Ahab, and Leviathan. And, you know, just so people watching this don't get all confused, I came from a Baptist background, so I understand that a lot of people are going to hear those names and be like, what does that even mean? It means the spirits that are bringing the ideas of manipulation to you, the ideas of lying. When you keep taking these thoughts they bring you and accepting them and acting upon them, all of this together equals you acting in a certain way. And in the Bible, it specifically tells you that you're not supposed to act in the spirit of Jezebel. It doesn't say it exactly that way, but Paul is warning the church about this, the Jezebel that's within the church that goes in there and destroys the church. You know, so it's not so much about the name. It's about, my husband and I describe it as, especially with our kids, it's like Satan has a playbook, and he doesn't seem to be very creative because he keeps using the same plays over and over again. Like, it's like he has the Jezebel play, and this is how I acted out in my life, and here's the Ahab play, and this is how I acted out in their life. And I see it within my kids too, with the rejection and the shame from their parents and their background, and just the shame they feel from not living with their biological mom and dad. It can be as simple as that. They have this shame Satan constantly is hammering them with, telling them, well, these people get to be with their biological parents, why don't you? And he just uses this against them. And that's why you can identify this stuff, and that's why I believe it's why your books and the prayers that you lead people through are so effective, because you can literally look at what Satan's doing in your life and it matches up with stuff he's done to other people. It's the same thing. And I know you know that because you see it all the time. It's the same thing over and over and over. It just works so good on all of us.
Yeah. So you ended up watching one of my Worldwide Deliverance sessions. It's on Facebook that people can watch every month. The last Sunday of the month, I do it at 9:00 Eastern, and then also on YouTube. And that gave you more education as to what you're dealing with. Then what happened next?
Well, I prayed the prayers myself, so that freed my mind of a lot of the chatter from the enemy in it, trying to you know, just bring negative thoughts to my head and affect me in different ways. But I also read somewhere within your group, someone said that if your child is under 18 or if they're, you know, young, you have the right to cut off the generational curses from your children. And that immediately, honestly, I didn't even care if that was true or not. I'm like, that is totally worth a shot, because these kids, especially Ely, so tormented. I will do anything for her. So, I sat down and I did those prayers over her. She was in her bedroom, fast asleep, doing her things, hopefully sleeping. I don't know what she's doing in there. But I was down in the living room. I wasn't even by her. And I prayed those prayers over her. I took authority in Jesus. I told the Lord, I said, you gave these children to me. I know I'm not their bloodline, but I am their mom
Yep.
now. And they get their inheritance from me. It's not going to be from the people that they were birthed to. And so I kind of did that and then said the prayers. Is mostly generational curse prayers. I don't know if I've gone through and done all the other prayers over the kids yet, but I did the generational curse one. And so then, you know, I just went to bed or whatever I was doing. And the next day, things had been going so bad that every day Ely would come home from school, throw a fit, everything, you know, it's just chaos. And no matter what, every single evening, by the end of the evening, we were pretty much telling her, you've got to go in your bedroom. You're being so mean to everybody. Like, that's it. We just deal with this all the time. So she goes to school that day and she comes home, and by 8 o'clock, 8:30 is their bedtime. By 8 o'clock, I looked at my husband and I said, have you thought about sending Ely to her room tonight? And he goes, no, not at all. This is after literally probably 3 weeks of every single night us being like, can't take it anymore. Go to your room, go play, go do something because you're just so mean. And and we literally looked at each other and we're like, holy cow, like maybe something actually happened. And when I pray those prayers, I'm so sincere out of pure desperation. It's like, because I'm not saying I've tried everything else. I've tried a lot of things to help my kids, and I've prayed for my kids and different things, but there is something to the authority of a believer taking the authority that comes from Jesus and going into spiritual battle for your kids. That has made a huge difference. And so, so then we've put all.
So we have about 1 minute left. So.
Okay. I'll just tell you real quick that the next day she went to a Bible club and she won the Quiet Award in Bible club. And the people we were talking to, the leaders, told my husband she's never been quiet enough to get, after 2 or 3 years of going to this club, she has never been quiet enough to get the quiet seat. And we have seen so many changes within our kids, and it has all really started from breaking off the generational curses that were on my children, and it has continued with us teaching our kids to take their thoughts captive and learn the difference between God's voice, their voice, and the voice of evil spirits that are constantly talking to them.
Amen. I'll share this too for everybody. On YouTube, there is a children's deliverance video that the Lord had me do for kids that are like 18 and under, that they can watch on their own, and they can go through the prayers to break off generational curses, spirits of Jezebel, Leviathan, and Ahab. And we're seeing miracles from that as well. So basically, it's made your life way better, way different than what it used to be. And of course,
Ely's too. I did do that with Ely, and she was sitting there, and she's 9, but she sat there and she was just nodding her head like she understood it, and she did do that prayer, and she's finally
Okay.
I know you are gonna have to go. Are we running out of time?
Yep.
Okay.
You got about 20 seconds. Yeah, 20 seconds left.
Okay, I was just gonna say, she finally, instead of feeling like she's out of control all the time, she finally has the ability to have some control in her decision making since doing that. So I've noticed that too.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing this, because it's going to give hope to those, especially that have adopted children, but also those that have children as well. So thank you so much. And we will let you go. All right. Thanks. See ya. Bye-bye.